You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series Doctor Who. And today we're discussing the Third Doctor story, The Three Doctors. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
How's it going?
Folks, remember to follow The Secrets of Doctor Who and wherever you find us in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, your favorite podcast app, or at the StarQuest YouTube channel where you can watch us, and you should make sure to hit the bell to get notifications after you subscribe. I want to tell you about another show on the StarQuest network you are sure to enjoy called The Secrets of Stargate, featuring our very own Father Cory and others, and you should check that out wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/Stargate. So, Jimmy, can you give us a recap of what happens in The Three Doctors?
This week, the forces from an antimatter universe start trying to abduct the Third Doctor, and they start sucking people and things into the antimatter world inside of a black hole. Even the Time Lords are under siege and can't do more than bring the Third Doctor's previous selves through time to help him out. So the Second Doctor shows up, but the First Doctor is stuck in a kind of limbo and can only communicate with them over FaceTime. Eventually, everybody ends up in the antimatter world after going through a kind of transformation that allows them to avoid exploding on contact with antimatter. And it turns out that the antimatter world was created by the ancient Time Lord hero Omega, who gave them, or Omega as we say in America, who gave them the ability to travel through time by creating the supernova that led to the black hole. It was believed that Omega had died during the incident, and they revered him as a hero, but he believes that he was abandoned and wants his vengeance. He also wants his freedom, but because he is creating the world inside the black hole by the force of his will, he can't leave without a replacement, and he wants the Doctor to replace him. But the doctors discover that his body has been eaten away and that actually all that's left of him is his will. They also discover that the Second Doctor's recorder wasn't transformed and is still made of normal matter. It's inside the TARDIS's force field generator, which is keeping it from exploding. So they offer Omega the force field generator as the only freedom he can ever have. And they provoke Omega into smashing the force field generator, knowing that contact with regular matter by the flute will cause an explosion of enormous proportions and kill him, thus giving him death, the only freedom he can ever have. Anyway, they do that, and the antimatter explosion causes the black hole to turn into a supernova, giving the Time Lords a new source of power, and it causes everything taken from Earth to snap back to its normal place. The other two doctors are returned to their previous times, and as a thank you, the Time Lords give the Third Doctor control of his TARDIS again, ending his exile on Earth for this 10th anniversary show. The end.
The end. So this is obviously the first multi-doctor story of, the first time we had multiple doctors, apart from regenerations, which, doesn't really count. And like you said, this was the 10th anniversary season, and so they decided to celebrate it by having the multiple doctors on screen, which kind of becomes a tradition, right? They then do this for other big ones. We've already talked about the two doctors in the Sixth Doctor time.
That wasn't an anniversary, though. That was just for fun.
Oh, I thought there was a significant date. Okay, and then what other ones were there? Was there four doctors?
No, there was the 5 doctors for the 20th anniversary. Then there was
Day of the Doctor.
for the 50th.
Okay.
There have been additional multi-doctor stories apart from regenerations, like the 2 doctors, which was just for fun because Troughton and Colin Baker were friends who would poke fun at each other, and Time Crash for television, and which is just a short, but it's still a lot of fun, featuring the 5th and the 10th Doctor as kind of a bridge between old Who and new Who.
Right. And then we had Tom Baker show up as the curator
in the 50th.
In the 50th.
Yep.
And then we also had the Five-ish Doctors, which was just a fun, unofficial thing that was it
Peter
Baker.
Davison did.
Yeah, Peter Davison, Tom Baker, and
No, Colin Baker.
I'm sorry, Colin Baker. I was trying to say not Tom Baker. But.
Sylvester McCoy and Paul McGann.
Right. Yeah, that was kind of fun. We should talk about that sometime. Mm-hmm. So the other
and then we had for Jodie Whittaker's finale, we had another multi-doctor story.
That's true.
And we're about to have something similar in some form for the 60th anniversary.
Right. Oh, can't forget also the 12th Doctor and the First Doctor with
Twice Upon a Time.
Twice Upon a Time, yes. So we've had multiple Doctor stories. And so the other things that make this notable, as this is the start of the 10th season. So the Third Doctor has been in exile on Earth until this point. Mm-hmm. And so this features the end of the Third Doctor's exile, where now he can he's given back the ability to travel in the TARDIS, more permanently. They kind of gave it to him temporarily at times. It's the first time that the Brigadier and Sergeant Benton go into the TARDIS, and the first use of the term "it's bigger on the inside." And I think those are the major firsts for this.
Also, first time we see the Second Doctor in color. His whole run was in black and white.
That's true.
And the First Doctor in color. Even if he's just on a TV monitor.
Right.
So this is the beginning. It's not just the 10th season. It's the beginning of the 10th season. So episode 1 of this is 10 seasons to the episode after An Unearthly Child. And it's interesting to think about An Unearthly Child and where the show was then and where it is now. Because so much has changed and so much more has been revealed, and the backstory has been filled in so much more than it was at the time of An Unearthly Child. I mean, now we know the name of the Doctor's people, the Time Lords. We know the name of the Doctor's home planet. It's Gallifrey. We even see Gallifrey in this episode, which is a first. I mean, seeing outside of a courtroom, and all of that was just a complete blank slate in the time of An Unearthly Child. They hadn't even figured any of that stuff out yet. Also, it's interesting to look at where the rest of the series is. If you go back 10 years, because the rest of this story, parts 2, 3, and 4, are so much better than the Tribe of Gum caveman sequence that immediately followed An Unearthly Child.
Not a high bar to jump, though. I mean.
Yeah, it was rough going in the very early going. Yeah.
This also set the precedent for doctors squabbling whenever they get together. Because that hadn't happened before. And now it's part of the fun to watch the doctors' reactions to each other and not be entirely pleased. We
get the first time the line of "You've remodeled. I don't like it."
Yeah.
Yes.
I love how cheerfully he says that. "Oh, you've done the TARDIS up. I don't like it." And it sounds very cheerful as he says it. And Patrick Troughton is just so much fun in this.
Yes.
Effectively, the two doctors squabble for the first 2 parts of the story. And then in episode 3, they're trapped in a cell with the other characters from UNIT who basically, I mean, Sergeant Benton and Joe Grant basically yell at them into cooperating. And after that, they really quickly start cooperating. They even become deferential to each other. You know, like the Second Doctor is, "Oh, I'll let you do this. Oh, no, you're so much better at it than me." You know. And so we get a lot more cooperation with just occasional little notes after that. But I thought it was my memory. I don't know if I was feeling bad the last time I watched this, but my memory is that it was a lot slower than it actually is on this rewatch, or than it seems on this rewatch. And I was thinking, previously Time Crash had been my far and away favorite Second Doctor story, even though it's 5 minutes long. It's got that marvelous line in it, 2 minutes to Belgium. which doesn't mean what you think it means. But the doctor has announced that if they don't fix the problem, a hole will be blown in the universe the exact size of Belgium. So 2 minutes to Belgium. But after rewatching this, it's like, no, this is so much more fun than I remembered. It moves a lot faster. And so Time Crash is no longer my runaway favorite of the multi-doctor stories. I think this is really up there too. This is much better than I remembered it.
This has always been one of the classic Who episodes I've enjoyed.
Mm-hmm.
I've always liked it, and part of it is the interaction between Patrick Troughton and John Pertwee. I mean, they're such great. They work off each other so well. And the comedy between them and everything is so great. With one or two clunker scenes we'll talk about, in a little bit, but it does work really well, and it does move pretty well, and you get to see Joe Grant and Sergeant Benton kind of be, their own agents. They've got their own agency as they're going through this. The Brigadier is the Brigadier, but it's a lot of fun. I've always really enjoyed it. Now, one thing I do want, speaking of the Brigadier, I do want to mention, he does technically travel in the TARDIS in this, although it's not under the TARDIS's own power. So does this when he officially becomes the companion? Because he did travel in the TARDIS.
Well, I think the gotta ride in a TARDIS companion rule is overblown, because lots of people have gotten rides in TARDISes, but I wouldn't call them companions.
Right.
That's kind of being silly, because that is kind of a thing in Doctor Who fandom, is you have to actually ride in the TARDIS to be a companion. And the Brigadier, I mean, he's clearly, as Sergeant Benton is. I like Sergeant Benton is like the most practical about it too. It's like, well, it's obvious that it's bigger on the inside. That doesn't need to be said.
Right.
He's still gobsmacked by it, though.
Oh yeah.
So the one of the things you mentioned, Father Cory, is the humor was what really makes this one for me. I mean, there's plenty of good action, but there's lots of great humor between, like you mentioned, Jimmy, between the two doctors, but also with the doctors and others. And I think that's really what elevates this one. I mean, there's plenty of action. I mean, it is fairly action packed. It's got some shooting things with the unit soldiers and that sort of stuff. But yeah, the humor really gets for me. But also the mythologizing, the introduction of Omega, and the this mythology of the Time Lords, and really that with the Third Doctor, I feel like that's when we've really started to build the mythology of the Time Lord civilization, much more so than we ever had with the first two Doctors, and Omega, Omega will be referenced. I don't know if he comes back. That's maybe
he comes back.
Okay.
He comes back in the Fifth Doctor's time in a really horrible story set in Amsterdam.
Oh, great.
I think, didn't we cover that
We
one?
covered it, yeah.
Oh, right. Yes, I remember that one now.
That's who that guy is. He's much better here.
Oh, yeah. And then the Seventh Doctor will reference him in a story we've done as well with a weapon. Yeah. And, a weapon from Omega. So he comes up again several times.
The hand of Omega in Death, not Death to the Daleks, but
Remembrance of the Daleks.
Remembrance of the Daleks.
Which was the 25th anniversary.
Yeah.
Yep. That's right. So let's, I should mention why William Hartnell wasn't on set. He only appeared on screen because he was so frail and ill at the time, I guess. He was, in fact, he had retired from acting and would die just 2 years later after they filmed this.
Yeah, and he was only in his mid-60s at the time, which is amazing to me. I mean, people aged quicker back then.
Oh, yeah.
And because he was in apparently his mid-50s when he got the part. Right. And his health was already bad, his memory was already going, and it's like, really? Wow. I am older than William Hartnell was when he became the Doctor.
I think about that sometimes myself.
Yeah, and he had atherosclerosis, so his blood vessels were being filled up with calcium. but and that caused all kinds of problems for him. But they gave him the call, and he said, "Oh, I'd love to come back." And but they caught him on a good day, and his wife immediately said, "No, you don't. You're not going back in to film a full 4-week story." And so they arranged a FaceTime solution for him.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why he kept looking off screen is he was literally looking at cue cards.
Yeah. Yeah.
He didn't have to memorize his lines. He would read, they'd have, a guy with the big white cards.
Yeah.
And he'd sit and read right off of it.
But, heck, he was kind of doing that when he was the first Doctor. Those seasons, he had trouble with the lines. So yeah. People lived harder lives back then. Not that long ago.
It's not unheard of for people to have similar issues as he does today, but it is more treatable today than it was then.
That's for sure. Yep.
Also, a lot of the atherosclerosis is caused by inflammation, and so today doctors actually monitor your inflammation levels and can prescribe things to reduce it.
Yep. The wonders of modern medicine. So one of the things that starts everything off in this is this
a comedy yokel,
right?
Which are which are de rigueur in these John Pertwee episodes. You're stuck on Earth in England. You got a comedy yokel there.
Yes, Mr. Allis, I think it is, right?
Well,
Mr. Arthur Allis.
Yeah.
For some reason, I thought it was like they filmed at the same location of Spearhead from Space, the first John Pertwee episode, where they had the comedy yokel. Poacher, but it wasn't. It might have been the same
location,
wildlife refuge,
yeah.
But it wasn't the same exact location.
Yeah, but notice we've got the flip side. Last time we had a poacher. This time we have a game warden.
Yep.
Right. And he stumbles on a balloon, a scientific balloon, looks like a weather balloon, the big silvery thing, doing a cosmic ray research experiment, which is kind of funny, which involves, it's very basic. It involves sending photographic plates or photographic film up on a box attached to the balloon up into the upper atmosphere, and then having it come back down again, and then developing it and looking at what develops. I mean, that is some basic research at the time. That's pretty wild.
That was what was done.
Yeah. He does make a reference by this Professor Tyler makes a reference to, we may not have Houston's resources, but we, like NASA, but, we get the job done, which is kind of fun. But what happens with it is something is in it, like this. I wasn't quite sure exactly what they're going with, but this cosmic ray creature was in it.
Yeah, the science here is sketchy at best, but there is an antimatter blob in the box that is represented by a special effect, and it's hard to describe because the science is so out of contact with reality.
Yeah.
But basically, they're gesturing at the fact, I assume, that you can make antimatter through cosmic ray collisions. And so we're studying cosmic rays here, and this blob of antimatter comes back, which is somehow connected to an energy beam being emitted, even though that's impossible, by a black hole. And there's an antimatter world inside of the black hole, and okay, that's at least possible because it doesn't violate any of the laws of physics. I mean, there could be antimatter inside of black holes, but all the rest of this is stitched together with Scotch tape and chicken wire.
Yeah, it doesn't really hold together very well. But when first, I don't know, I couldn't figure out why it was when Mr. Allis was missing, because he gets absorbed by the thing, why he immediately calls unit and just doesn't assume the guy has wandered off. It's kind of a funny.
They don't convey this very well on screen, but he sees we have this Professor Tyler who's driving to pick up the weather balloon, and he sees he relates this later in dialogue. He saw Allis at the weather balloon, and then as soon as he arrived at the weather balloon, he realized Alice wasn't there. So Alice disappeared in a matter of seconds. And he also says he was going to call them anyway because of the cosmic ray stuff, that the findings they'd been getting from their cosmic ray research.
Okay. The Brigadier makes a reference that I didn't get. I wonder if either of you two got it. I think it's probably a British thing or a early 1970s thing or both. The Brigadier says sort of dryly to Professor Tyler when he's at unit headquarters, make yourself at home. We're only supposed to be a top secret security establishment. Liberty Hall, Dr. Tyler, Liberty Hall. What's Liberty Hall? Do you know?
I had to look that up, but it basically means you have freedom of movement. You can do whatever you want. It's kind of, and of course, the Brigadier's doing it completely sarcastically. He's basically, we're top secret. You're not really supposed to know we even exist, but hey, have free reign of the facilities. It'd be like saying, the cafeteria is just down the hall. You'll get a cup of coffee if you want. That kind of idea.
Wander around, yeah. Okay, all right. That makes more sense. Then that's one of the things I like about watching these classic shows is the references I don't get and learning about them. So so this Professor Tyler kind of comes in and out of this story. He also ends up getting flashed out of existence, but it turns out they're being transported, as you mentioned, to this other world. And once he's there at this other world, he's kind of interesting. So he kind of is a classic professor. He's a bit bumbling, a bit clueless. But at one point when he and the Doctor and Joe are captured by Omega and the gels, whatever those creatures are.
Okay, so we now have a second creature that we need to talk about.
Sure.
The first one is the antimatter blob that comes in the weather balloon's experimental payload that's hidden in there. And it creeps around through drains and stuff. It's like the blob in the movie The Blob. But then we have these other blobs that just teleport in, and they look kind of like giant eggplant bubble wrapped seaweed monsters
with a crab claw.
And they're called apparently gels in the script or something like that. I don't know that they say their name on screen.
I don't think so.
They refer to them as the creatures. But we have both of them serving as antagonists. And it's not 100% clear to me why. Because why do we need two of these two different kinds of antimatter monsters? But that's what we get. And so
you need
there are two.
You get the teleporty creature and the shooty creature.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the shooty creature, the gels, are practical effects, so a little easier to do perhaps at the time. I guess, yeah. So, so when they're captured by them and they're taken into Omega's palace and imprisoned, or they're waiting to see Omega, Tyler gets this this wild hair, like, I'm going to escape. It's like the Doctor's like, stop. What are you doing? You're going to ruin everything. And he's just like, no, I'm going to escape. And it's like, dude, calm down. It was kind of wild. I think it's kind of funny. Yeah, character.
He's being possessed by a plot demon because we need to kill some runtime, and so we're gonna have Tyler waste 5 minutes of airtime trying to escape and escaping and then finding his way back.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's Tyler, and then so one of the elements is that this antimatter blob is chasing. The Doctor figures out it's chasing him, that it wants him. At one point, it takes Bessie, Bessie the car. People don't remember, which poor Bessie. So at first you think these things are all being destroyed, but it turns out they're being transported, including a lab table. Part of the wall of the Doctor's lab,
the house itself,
the whole building,
a water cooler,
the Brigadier's computer, which I thought was a funny little reference. Like Joe's like, "What's that?" It's a computer, my dear. It's like the reel-to-reel thing.
Data storage device.
It's a
real data storage device.
Yeah, it's a tape drive.
Yeah. So all that stuff ends up on this antimatter planet at one point or another. In Mr. Alice and Professor Tyler. So I love the fact that they set guards on the drains. Like, so after the Bessie disappears, the doctor tells the Brigadier, it's like, set guards. What are they supposed to do? Like, they don't give him instructions. They just like set guards.
Sergeant Benton even had that look like, yet another task we have to do just because, you know. He's so put upon so many times. It's so funny.
Yep.
At a minimum, posting guards on the drains will alert you to where the creature is emerging.
That's true.
What might be under threat.
That is true. That is true. So they get cornered in the TARDIS by the antimatter creature, the Doctor and Joe and Benton, and the Doctor sends an SOS that alerts the Time Lords. And it's interesting. So we get to see the Time Lord Central Command, and they're already under siege by Omega, who's an equal and opposite force to them. It's taking all of their resources to counter or attempt to counter what he's doing, which is the plot device that makes them send the other two doctors. So I thought that was an interesting insight or look into the Time Lords and how they turn to the third Doctor.
Yeah, it's also interesting to me how they're visually depicted, because this is only the second time we've seen Time Lords other than the Doctor well, I should say it's only the second time we've seen them in their native environment. We saw them at the end of the War Games, where they appeared in they're sort of like robes, kind of like choir robes, but black and white. And here they have kind of developed that theme further. They have, it's hard to quantify, but they look a little more robe-like, and they've got more, what do you call them? Adornments, accessories.
Yeah.
That's what they're called. But they don't yet have the giant collars from Tom Baker's time, and they don't yet have the bright colors from Tom Baker's time. So we're still in the process of forming the Time Lord aesthetic, and I kind of like this one. It's too bad that they've kind of gotten away from this one, but this one is kind of this. I like the first one and this one. They're visually interesting,
right?
And mention that we see Gallifrey, but really what we're seeing is basically an office. One room of the control of Gallifrey,
right?
Yeah. They also have a mistaken understanding of what black holes are. The scriptwriters describe them as a zone of nothingness. It's like, no, okay, and they show one on screen, and it's shaped irregularly because they're thinking of it as if it's like a tear in space.
Yeah,
and that is not what black holes are. To the extent a black hole has a shape, it would be perfectly spherical, and I mean, even that's problematic, but you wouldn't represent it as this jagged, irregular thing. And it's not a zone of nothingness. It's an intense gravitational source.
And they also refer to the singularity as something apart from the black hole, like that.
Right.
That's sort of the power of the black hole, which Omega has control of.
They say it can only exist inside of a black hole, and it's like, actually, there are other ways you can have singularities, but
yeah. So, referring to the second Doctor and Benton and the Brigadier, we remember that they met the second Doctor, and so we have a little bit of a reunion happening at this point. And the Brigadier kind of thinks that, because since Pertwee is missing, he thinks that Pertwee, the third Doctor, has taken on the second Doctor face again, and it's the same person. And in fact, the Brigadier is very skeptical of everything going on, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, it's a little unfortunate. The hypothesis, the Doctor's face has changed again, and it's changed back into what it used to look like. That's a reasonable hypothesis, but if you have people telling you, no, that's not what's happening, I've moved in time, you should pay attention to what they're saying. You shouldn't just reject it and cling to your pet hypothesis.
Yeah.
That is an unfortunate thing that they do with the Brigadier. Sometimes they when he doesn't understand what's going on, instead of trying to figure it out, he just gets stubborn.
Yeah.
And this is not the only time we see that. We see that kind of throughout as, whenever they need someone to be kind of the stubborn character, when unit's involved, it's the Brigadier.
Right.
Benton is usually much more open about what's going on, and it just kind of rolls with it. But not the Brigadier, and sometimes the Brigadier does too. He's just like, okay, doctor, whatever you say.
Yeah. But he's sort of the stereotypical stodgy senior officer, in those cases. Yeah.
I really like the scenes, especially the ones that don't involve the Brigadier. Where, I mean, I like the Brigadier stuff too, but I particularly enjoy when Benton is able to be alone with the second Doctor, and they're battling this antimatter blob. It is what a treat this must have been for both the actor who plays Benton, John Levitt, and John Levine and Patrick Troughton, to be able to be reunited, and because they had previously battled the Cybermen and stuff, and here they are battling an antimatter blob. It must have been a real nostalgia moment for them, but it was a nostalgia moment for me.
Yeah.
And we should mention that the first, and they bring it up in the episode, but the first time that the Brigadier and then Colonel, if I remember right.
Yeah, Colonel.
Yeah, Colonel. And some of the others, or at least the Brigadier meets them, was the Yeti episode in the Web of Fear.
Web of Fear.
Web of Fear. Right. We've done that one recently.
Unit, we haven't talked about the episode yet, but we will see Unit being established under the second Doctor as well later.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Also, I like when the second Doctor shows up. He's immediately very charming, and he and the third Doctor are squabbling a bit, but he's very charming, and he immediately takes to Jo. Now they had wanted Fraser Hines to reappear in this story as Jamie and have a romance with Jo. But unfortunately, Fraser Hines was committed elsewhere. He had another acting job he was doing. And so they ended up transferring a lot of his lines to Benton and making them non-romantic.
Right.
But when the second Doctor shows up, I mean, he's used to having companions. He doesn't have one of his here, but he immediately understands Jo's role in things. And he is being charming, and he says, "I may call you Jo, mayn't I?" And I just love that. You don't see that one very often. Mayn't as a contraction of may not.
Yeah. He's very charming.
Well, I love it when they're trying to explain. The two Doctors are trying to explain to Jo and Benton what's going on, and the third Doctor goes, "He is me, and I am him." And Jo immediately goes, "And we're all together. Goo goo ka-choo."
Yeah,
the Beatles. Yes, the Beatles.
And then she had to explain what the song was.
Yeah, I am the walrus.
Also, this also establishes a new bit of, because I don't think they've established this before, but Time Lord telepathy.
Yes,
because they make contact. They do the contact, and they have a kind of visual effect for that. But I believe this is the first reference on screen to Time Lords being telepathic.
Yeah, this first time we see contact, first time we see them communicating that way. So
it's so handy because it means they don't have to explain everything again for the sake of the audience. It's a handy shorthand. They're like, "Oh, here, let me just sum up in contact."
And then towards the end of the episode, they don't have to explain the entire plot.
Right.
To try to get that communicating back and forth on the whole plot. It's like, okay, we've got the plot now. This will work, and then we see it play out.
They also have another way of avoiding explaining everything, because at one point the Brigadier. So when the second Doctor first shows up, Jo and Benton are present, but the Brigadier is not, and so that's why he doesn't believe that the second Doctor is the second Doctor, because he didn't see him with the third Doctor. So when the Brigadier shows up, he has this hypothesis that the Doctor's face is changed back, and it's like, well, then what really happened? And we cut to another scene, and we cut back, and Patrick Troughton is saying, "And so that's what happened. It's really simple, see?" And he still doesn't believe it.
Right. What was I going to say? The Time Lords refer, when they're going to send the first Doctor, they refer to him as the earliest Doctor, which is an interesting bit of information that eventually we find out gets changed.
Been retconned, yeah.
Yes, it's been taken, yeah. And the I think the Time Lord Chancellor, I think it is, refers to. Oh no, the first Doctor does. The first Doctor refers to the Pertwee as a clown. Oh no, Troughton as a clown, and Pertwee as a dandy. Yeah.
Yeah. He doesn't identify them by name, but
Yep.
he says, "So you're my successors, a dandy and a clown."
And they are correctly offended by such a thing.
Well, they both play it so well because they're both kind of smiling, glad to see him, and then it's like,
Yeah. Again, the whole Doctor meeting his other incarnations thing. I like that line. Couple other moments.
Well, I mean, it's understandable. I mean, just imagine that you totally change your personality and sense of style and physical appearance, and that just happens to you every so often. It's like you've gone crazy. And you would probably be jarred by seeing yourself in this other. It's like, what the heck is going on with me now?
Yeah. I could accept that. Yeah. There's a couple funny moments, couple funny lines. With the second Doctor, like you mentioned, loses his recorder at some point, his little flute, and that is iconic for him, and keeps looking for it. And at one point he says, "If only I could find my recorder, I could play you a little something to pass the time." And the Brigadier says, "We must be thankful for small mercies."
Yeah.
I love that one. That was a good one.
One of the things that happens with the second Doctor's recorder, now at first it's just a playful thing that's characteristic of him, and then he loses it and becomes obsessed with it. And it from a writing perspective, it seems a little annoying that he's this over the top obsessed with the loss of his recorder at this crisis moment. But then in front of Omega, he is, and we should talk about Omega. So we don't actually see Omega. He's wearing a costume that includes a mask that is basically a frog-faced samurai helmet.
Yeah.
And he has like no nose on the helmet. And he's strutting around, and actually this version of Omega is a lot more interesting than the one we see later in Peter Davison's time. This one has an actual actor inside the costume, and he's actually acting and displaying different moods, including enjoyment and appreciation of things among his desire for vengeance. He's clearly enjoying himself, and that makes the character a lot more interesting. But in front of Omega, he's been explaining how I've created this world through the power of my will. And he's so he's boasting and he's enjoying himself. And Patrick Troughton says, "Oh, could you whip me up a recorder?" Yeah, that throws him off his stride, and he is angrily dismissive of it. And Patrick Troughton is like, "Well, a little recorder wouldn't be too much to ask," and the third Doctor, John Pertwee, then is like talking to the second Doctor. It's like, can you cool it on the recorder front right now? Yeah. And what do you think you're doing? And Patrick Troughton pulls the curtain back on what the second Doctor regularly does and says, "I'm testing the limits of his self-control. I'm deliberately being unreasonable in order to see how easy it is to get him to lash out." Which will be crucial to their eventual plot later on.
Right.
But this is a classic second Doctor. He's portraying this innocent, bumbling, appearance to his enemy, and letting him think he's obsessed about a recorder, when really he's performing a test.
Yeah, I mean, it's one way that's how they really show the difference between these three Doctors and their personalities and their ways of going about things. At one point, the third Doctor's doing Venusian Aikido against the dark side of Omega's mind. That's his more physical aspect to him. Troughton is about being the clever clown. The first Doctor was all more cerebral. He has all the knowledge. So,
well, in the third Doctor, he's doing more of the scientific stuff. There's the scene he's in the laboratory working with them, things like that.
Yes.
So yeah, you definitely do see the different personalities coming out.
I think that's clever on the part of the writers. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is part of why 2 and 7 are among my most favorite Doctors, because they both do the Columbo thing. They both come across as humble, and they're allowing their enemies to misunderestimate them.
Yeah.
And I much prefer that to the strutting, arrogant, shouty Doctors.
Right. This, I have to say, the slow motion Venusian Aikido scene was just so very. That was another time filler. Clearly,
that's what I referred to. At the beginning of the with a couple of scenes exception, and that's one right there. Where it's just like, it's so painful.
Yes. When they first arrive on the antimatter planet, Joe is like, "Are we dead?" And
that was nice. Joe becomes convinced they're dead temporarily.
And the Doctor says it isn't much like heaven. So they're in another rock quarry somewhere in England.
Oh, yeah.
Probably
the same one they film at all the time.
Right. Let's just film from this angle. There's another funny exchange at the very end between Mrs. Ollis and Mr. Ollis.
This is our stinger. This is our out note for the fourth episode.
And he goes like, where do you think you've been, Arthur Ollis? I've been worried sick about you. I have. Everybody's been searching. Where have you been? Soldiers looking for you. You didn't come home for your dinner. Well, and he just says, you'd never believe me, woman. Supper ready?
Yeah.
It's a very much like the stoic, a stiff upper lip country, bumpkin sort of thing, which is fun. I really like that one. Any other notes on this episode? Things that I didn't cover in my notes here, Father Cory?
So I'm trying to. There was some. Sorry, I'm blanking. There was something I wanted to mention. There was a bit of a meta line here about feed it with useless info. Wonder if I have a television set handy.
That was going to be my outline on this.
Oh,
one.
Sorry.
That's fine. That's fine.
That was a good meta one. And then, I want to say, this episode does confirm that the Time Lords are actually clones from the Clone Wars, and that Omega from Bad Batch becomes an evil bad guy, stellar manipulator.
Right. Crosshair. Yeah. That's funny. Jimmy?
So there's a moment late in the story where everybody's gotten back to Earth except the Doctors. And they're thinking or suspecting for a minute that the Doctor may have died in the explosion. And the Brigadier has a really nice line where he's not formally eulogizing the Doctor, but he's doing a little bit of that, and he says, "Wonderful chap." Both of them.
Yeah.
Both of them. Right.
Also, it's remarkably dark what the Doctor does in this. The two Doctors, they're given Omega the only freedom he could ever have, which is death. And it's like, okay, they're deliberately killing him. They're giving him this device. They know it's going to kill him, and then they deliberately provoke him. And after that, let's test the limits of his self-control from earlier in the story. They then push him past the limits of his self-control by being demanding, and so he lashes out. He smashes the device. It causes the matter flute to come in contact with the antimatter universe, and bam, everything blows up. And they're doing that so this is the Doctor committing euthanasia. All of Omega's body has previously been eaten away by centuries or millennia of exposure to the particles coming from the singularity, which doesn't make any sense. And so he's basically a ghost now. Now, how exactly this works is like, okay, so if his will is all that exists, an explosion isn't going to destroy his body because he ain't got one.
Right.
And he's going to come back and haunt you in Peter Davison's time, which is exactly what he does.
Yeah.
So it's not actually the best thought out plan, but in terms of what they're intending to do, they're intended to kill him as a sort of act of mercy and also escape. And although I don't think the mercy is foremost in their minds, I think it's the escape. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, wow, this is actually pretty darn dark.
Yeah, I mean, even call it back with the Doctor and Joe at the end, kind of talking about it, and she's like, "Oh, you're still upset because you had to trick Omega," and he says, "I promised him his freedom, and I gave it to him, the only freedom he could ever have." And that because there was no other way to free him from this universe. And it occurs to me, like, the way they talk about Omega, he's like their George Washington. He's he's not Rassilon, I know, but he's sort of created what we now know as of the Time Lord. He gave them time travel. And so it would be like if George Washington went crazy and needed to be, euthanized.
In story terms, it is like he's Rassilon because Rassilon hasn't been invented as a character yet. So,
okay.
So Omega
is kind of more Ben Franklin would be a better analogy.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
Scientific minded, but also with Ben Franklin was influential in some of the philosophy as well of the founding of the country.
Right.
Things like that. So,
as the Firesign Theater says, Ben Franklin, the only president of the United States who was never president of the United States.
I wonder what the percentage of Americans who think that Ben Franklin was president is.
By the way, one more thing I did forget to mention. In the 12th Doctor, Kate Stewart mentions to the Doctor that all the Brigadier wanted to do was a salute. Receive a salute from the Doctor. Well, of course, in this, as the Brigadier goes through the singularity to leave, he salutes the Doctor.
Right. All right, so I think that should do it for this time. Before we go, we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Doctor Who, including Robert B., Alfredo M., Elliot J., Vyland F., and Maria D. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. And we'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edited this episode. So we'd love...
And before we go...
Oh, yes, before we go.
I wanted to share something that I found on YouTube by a strange coincidence the day before we recorded this. Mm-hmm. It's a little, 12-second clip of Patrick Troughton. And, we had Patrick Troughton and his identity confusion with the third Doctor in this episode. And in this clip, you have a TARDIS standing on what looks like a London street, I guess. And Patrick Troughton comes out of it and introduces himself and then has a startling realization, which causes him, just like he did in the episode, to vanish.
Hello, I'm John Pertwee. No, I'm not.
And then the clip actually goes on for quite a bit longer after that. But, that is pretty good. That has to have been quite a while afterward. He
much
looks
older.
Yeah,
it
much older.
Looks like the 80s, maybe something they filmed in either for a convention or at a convention or for the two Doctors.
That's what I was wondering. I was wondering if it was part of the two Doctors filming, just something for fun or...
Yeah, he looks very different. I didn't recognize him at first. So, excellent. That was very good. So, that's it from us this time. What did you think of the three Doctors? You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page, or send an email to drwho@sqpn.com, or visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. You can watch The Secrets of Doctor Who in video on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia. And we'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the 12th Doctor story, The Girl Who Died. Me. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing The Secrets of Doctor Who. Jimmy Akin, thank you as well. I'm Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest. And remember, useless information. I wonder if I have a television set handy.